Hi, everybody. My name is Tamar Krongrad, and I am co-founder of USA for Israeli Democracy. Thank you for joining us. USA for Israeli Democracy came into being as a grassroots, purely voluntary basis as a response to the judicial regime coup. Our goal was, and still is, to help those who love and support Israel realize the very real danger that Israel's democracy is facing, and as a result, the danger that Israel itself is facing. As part of this effort, we provide the most comprehensive information in English about the judicial coup and the protest movement. You can find this information in our many channels, including our website, YouTube and Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and now TikTok, which is all available thanks to our contributors, translators, and web and social media curators. Feel free to join our WhatsApp groups, whose barcode is right behind me. We hold numerous webinars, having done so with legal scholars, leaders of the Democracy Task Force in Israel, and our more recent ones being with Dr. Ido Baum, Tom Friedman, Yossi Klein Halevi, and Emil Tibon. USA for Israeli Democracy is one of the member groups under the Democracy Task Force in Israel. If you wish to donate to the Democracy Task Force, you can find a 501c3 donation button on our website. USA for Israel Democracy is non-affiliated with any other existing group or political organization. We are of varying political persuasions, religious beliefs. We are Israeli expats, US-born, all working for one goal: to protect Israel's democracy. Today, we are very pleased to host former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who will give us some opening remarks with regard to the crisis in Israel, after which I will ask some questions, and then my friend Victoria Cook will follow up with Q's and A's, which you can submit through the Q&A feature. Former Prime Minister Ehud Barak served in the IDF, the Israel Defense Force, for 35 years, rising to the position of Chief of the General Staff and the rank of Lieutenant General, the highest in the Israeli military. He was awarded the Medal of Distinguished Service and 4 Chiefs of Staff citations, Tzalash HaRamatkal, for courage and operational excellence. These 5 decorations make him the most decorated soldier in Israeli history. Ehud Barak has been a key player in Israeli politics since 1995, serving as Minister of Defense, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Minister of the Interior. And of course, he served as Prime Minister, as leader of the Labour Party from 1999 to 2001, defeating Bibi Netanyahu at the time. So thank you very much for joining us. And now I will turn the screen over to you.
Thank you for introducing me. I'm glad to be here with you over the Zoom, with you on the screen, and with all the viewers through the Zoom system. Israel is amidst the most severe crisis that we had since the establishment of the state, something unprecedented. In somewhat strange way, it's not a crisis that is created by a threat from the outside, but it's about a threat and great cleavage from within. Some 9 months ago, and I will try only to give some contour lines for the situation, and then leave most of the time for question and answer. I believe it's much more effective. We have a government legally elected 9 months ago. During the campaign for the election, they promised to focus on 4 issues: Iran, possibility of normalization in Saudi Arabia, the housing shortage, and the cost of living. But the moment they came to power, they started a blitzkrieg on the judicial system, something that looks like an amok run or autoimmune disease, They forget everything else and try to go on this Supreme Court. Our Chief Justice, Chayut, a lady named Esther Chayut, she defined it very, very clearly from day one. She said, this is not a reform. This is an attempt to crush the independence of the Supreme Court and to push Israel out of the family of democracies. In response to this blitz, there kind of a spontaneous popular support for the opposition, but it ended up to be quite alone. The opposition are not fully with us, but basically a popular protest emerged, very powerful, moving, inspiring, wide scale. At the top, it started with some 50,000, and at the height of it got over 500,000 people, which is the equivalent of more than 15 million Americans gathering every weekend. It's already continues now for the 33rd week. And all the leading group in Israeli society, in the judicial profession, of course, in the economy, in the security, all practically 90% of the former leaders of the IDF, the Secret Service, the Mossad, are all joining hands in supporting this protest movement. And of course, they are joined by the elite of the healthcare system, the elite of the academy, and the elite of the high-tech operation in Israel. Once the blitzkrieg was blocked at the night some 3.5 months ago, when Netanyahu, out of London, over the phone, announced that he's firing the Minister of Defense, who found himself with no other choice than to tell the people that he requested a gathering of the cabinet because what he saw as a clear and present danger to our kind of security. And instead of having the gathering of the cabinet, he got the firing announcement that's immediately, within few hours, brought up protests of a few hundreds of thousands, and Netanyahu yielded to the pressure and canceled it, basically. But immediately they chose an alternative strategy, which we call Polish salami, following Kaczynski, the way that he dealt with. There was some massive demonstration in Warsaw, so he ordered the president to veto certain law that his own people raised, and everything became quiet, and he waits carefully, made incremental small steps, and after half a year assaulted on the democracy and basically ended normal democracy in Poland. People should understand, probably most of the viewers here know it, but it's not clear to the general public in the world. In Israel, there is no constitution, no checks and balances, no bicameral parliament that is elected in different ways and different systems, no veto power for the president, no filibuster. There is basically nothing whatsoever to balance the power but the independence of the Supreme Court. And it was Chief Justice Barak, a former one, not relative of mine, who once said that the Israeli political system is a hybrid of the American system, but without constitution, without checks and balances, and the British parliamentary system, but without the British tradition. He did not add, and without the British character, which I think is even more important, but without the extrajudicial norm of it isn't done. So Israel is really, almost literally, protected only by the independence of the Supreme Court, and that's what makes those steps so critical and well kind of understood by a major part of the public. During these 9 months now, no government in our history caused such a huge damage to every aspect of our life. Huge damage to the economy, huge damage to the security, the internal cohesion within the armed forces, huge damage to the relationship with the United States, huge damage to the cohesion within the whole society in such a short time. And you naturally ask, what is behind it? What the hell is driving this kind of emocran and so on? And the answer is painful, but simple, quite apparent. This is an unholy alliance between Netanyahu, who finds himself threatened by a kind of criminal court case for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in 3 different cases that are dealt simultaneously in just fear of being found guilty, because that's the result of 97% of Israeli criminal court cases. And he set this unholy alliance with another already convicted minister named Deri, who runs a traditional Sephardic party, but basically already got, he was stayed in prison for about almost 2 years for previous cases of corruption. And he wants now to rehabilitate himself and being bring back into the same ministry where he executed these crimes, and later on even to become the finance minister. So, and the third element is the ultra-Orthodox, who want just to protect their way of life, and they need a lot of budget, and they found an opportunity to extract it for this government where everyone needs some kind of payment for his participation, and has to ignore the real public good. And the last group is those Messianic racist group represented by Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, Rotman. They are the successor of Rabbi Kahana. I don't want to spend too much part of that. They are total nuts that distort both Judaism, Zionism, and even humanity. And it's guys that should never appear in our government, but Netanyahu, under his constraints and the need to put an end to his trial, joined hand with them and gave them out of all ministries the finance ministry, a second minister in the Ministry of Defense, responsible for the what happens in Judea and Samaria, or West Bank, as people call it, and another one, he made him Minister of National Security, as they call it, namely responsible for the police and the border guard. And the results are here in the streets. The terror rose his head in Judea and Samaria. The crime is flourishing, the organized crime is flourishing in the Arab society and also in the Jewish society. And bad results, but they are determined to keep on this trajectory. That's what we found in the recent months. So Israel basically is a success story, probably the most successful national project. We just celebrated our 75th anniversary in spite of 7 wars and 2 intifadas, infinite number of operations in between. The population grew all along those 75 years by a factor of 14, and the GDP by a factor of 77.0. We are member of the OECD. We are a startup nation. The Israeli shekel was one of the strongest currencies until very recently when this government impact started to show up. We have more Nobel Prize laureates in sciences than China or Russia, for example. And Israel is still the strongest country, 1,000 miles around Jerusalem, both militarily, strategically, technologically, economically. We are not the biggest economy, but by far the most vibrant one. And if we keep a proper relationship with the United States, even the support of the United States provides us with the QME, quantitative military edge, and a diplomatic safety net in all international fora. And this is in front of our eyes. It's destroyed. It's gradually destroyed. It's not something that imminently risks Israel, but it's a quiet risk in the midterm and longer term. And that's why we have to stop it. I'm probably optimistic about it. I told the public we will see toil and sweat and tears. I hope no blood, but we will end up winning. I cannot tell you how long it will take, and I cannot tell you how exactly the final the final end game will look like. But I'm confident Israel will not turn into neither Poland nor Hungary. Israel will not turn into a dictatorship. We are very strong. We are not afraid of anyone and anything, and we are determined to keep fighting until we will win. We'll stop this judicial coup, and we will make sure that it won't be possible to repeat this threat on democracy. We don't have another country, and we are defending what is most precious for us. Basically, in more general terms, we look around, we are defending democracy. In political science, you will find the definition: democracy has to be capable of defending itself against those who are using the very tools that it provides and the very freedoms that it bestows upon the citizens in order to destroy it from within. And this possibility is there in democracies. So we, the people, the public, the citizens, have to be open-eyed, not to sleep on our job, and identify what's going to happen and to prevent it from happening. And that's exactly what we are doing. I'm confident that in due time we will win, and I'll be happy to have another webinar by that time. Thank you. That's my opening remarks, and I'm about the time, so go ahead with the questions.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot to unpack there. I want to take you to an article that you published recently in the Israeli press. You mentioned that Bibi doesn't want unity. He doesn't intend to stop before he and his government trample over everything that stands in their way. And you called for non-violent civil uprising or civil disobedience. Civil uprising sometimes carries a negative connotation in the United States more than the Hebrew expression, but you referred specifically to Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King as your role models. I want to try to explain to the American audience, and to avoid the lost in translation, if you could explain further what you mean by nonviolent civil disobedience, and whether the democracy movement is heading in that direction.
I basically saw the opposite in regard to the translation. When you translate it easily, kind of smoothly from English to Hebrew, we use the term Meri Ezrachi. Meri sounds in Hebrew very close to mered, to rebellion. And people think, oh, the Barak called for rebellion. Not calling for rebellion. I said that probably Israelis do not, never heard the term non-violent civil disobedience. But I told them that Netanyahu knows it very well. He studied high school in Philadelphia. He probably had a lesson about Henry David Thoreau, and that's exactly what we mean. And I gave examples. It's true how Mahatma Gandhi pushed out the British Empire after 250 years of controlling the subcontinent of India. They pushed them out, basically without many shooting. And I mentioned Martin Luther King because he did something once again to make some 100 years after the 13th Amendment to start to implement it more seriously. And I mentioned the 7 from Chicago, the youth movement that basically stopped the Johnson, later Nixon, from moving on in Vietnam, and the young movement who pushed out the dictator in Serbia, Milosevic, put an end to it. And I told them, take inspiration for this. I really mean it. That if, as I think it was even the original Henry David Thoreau talks about you can obey, but you can also transgress. You have to. I basically say, why a government can declare a war, and we have to serve. Government can decide to make peace, even if we oppose it. Government can take out or give up some land as the Likud government made to the Gaza Strip. But a government does not have legitimacy to change the very structure of the regime because it serves it in whatever way. That's approaching an illegitimate domain. In social sciences, one of the founders of this academic field, Max Weber, analyzed the situation and said that even monarchs who reigned under the grace of heaven could not do whatever comes to their minds. When they try to do things that are illegitimate by the judgment of their subject, not even citizens, it showed up that there is a problem. I recently talked to a British guy. I told them, think of King Charles, not the present one, the original one. If so, that he can do whatever comes to his mind, or he the only one that contacts with heaven. And it ended up that he was beheaded. And 150 years later, on the other side of the canal, the lady who saw that if they don't have bread, they might try brioche, some kind of French cake. And she also was beheaded. We don't think of beheading anyone, but we are clear when the whole, the whole structure, the structure of the regime, when even our elected CEO tries to change Israel into de facto dictatorship, we are not going to let it happen, whatever it takes. I always say, make it non-violent. There is a limit to how far you can go with the law when the government itself acts out of this invisible domain of legitimacy, totally illegitimate way. And we basically say, in Israel, there is a precedent from the military of some event in '56 happening in a small city called Kafar Qasim, what ended up that some civilians were killed by illegal order that was executed by people of police and border guard on the field. And since then, in the officers' school, we teach every new officer that when it comes to an blatantly illegitimate order, you don't just have the right to disobey, you have an obligation to disobey. And it's every officer in Israel knows it. but citizens are not, some of them are not acquainted with it, especially the ultra-Orthodox or those Messianic nuts. And so we insist on it, and that's basically the limit. We will do whatever it takes. We'll try to avoid blood or violence, but we'll do whatever it takes to stop it. We don't want to end up in de facto dictatorship, period.
Okay, I'm going to switch over now to a bit of a different take. You've known Bibi Netanyahu for forever, and I've read that you've joked that you're responsible for this whole thing because you didn't convince him to stay in a military career. The question is, would we not be seeing this issue under a different leader? The ultra-Orthodox would still be demanding not to serve in the army, or perhaps maybe the army doesn't need them. What's your position on this?
You know, some people from the guy I talk to from time to time, some people even from the government, and they tell me, but what's the problem? How comes that these small modifications in the law that makes it dictatorship and so on? I told them, look, if we were talking about Menachem Begin, who was a great admirer of rule of law, he saw that it protects him against every citizen, or even Shamir, who was extreme right-winger, but an honest person who respects the rule of law. I would not care of passing this modification, but with Netanyahu, when all the mask fell, and we see what he's trying to do, we should not be so innocent as to assume that when he tells American interviewers that do not understand the situation of Israel, that, oh, it's just small modification. What's that? It's just giving the politicians the right to nominate judges, like in the US, and having these overruling clause, like in Canada. But if that's just such a tiny issue, why the hell you are determined to destroy the very capability of the army to protect Israel, or the damage to the economy, or the damage the relationship with the United States, and to tear apart the whole society? If that's so small, wait for another year or 2 years until some wider understanding will emerge, and then change it. And you cannot avoid the conclusion that the only reason, it's painful to say, but the only reason that motivates the Prime Minister of Israel has nothing to do with his oath to the law of loyalty when he announced his government to the Knesset, nothing to do with public good, nothing to do with security of Israel, nothing to do with the flourishing of our economy, nothing to do with anything but saving himself from this court case. And that's crazy to give this opportunity, something which it's evident that that's what's happening. You have to be either, I know how to call it, extremely naive or blind or opportunist in order not to see it. And so that's not the case. Of course, the Haredim, they have ultra-Orthodox, they have the problem, they will still have it then. But I think that what happened during these 9 months, the severity of the crisis opened minds for majority of Israel, who were used, everything was normalized, the pressure, they negotiate, they compromise, they get something beyond what they probably deserve, but in order to keep Shlom Bayit, to keep the house kind of quiet, we'll give them, don't make it. Nowadays, I think that it makes everyone extremely aware of this big elephant in the room, relationship between religion and the state, and especially the control. It's relevant also for the Jewry all around the world. It's the absurd situation where good Jews are not equal Jews when they come to Israel, because there is some monopoly on the interpretation of religion to this Orthodox system, which does not recognize major fractions of the Jewish people as real Jews or good enough Jews, which is ridiculous. So I think that we will go into much more profound changes once this crisis is put behind us.
Okay. So you've been prime minister, obviously. Tell me, with the millions that have been out in the streets, and you mentioned every week, but of course now we know, those of us living in Israel know that it's daily, it's hourly, it's all the time, everywhere. It's surrounding us everywhere. Do these street protests have an effect on the prime minister? I mean, he's still plowing ahead. So
think of it, because he's focused basically on getting out of his court case. So when he felt that he's strong enough to hold him, he lost his confidence for a moment and blocked this amok run toward the blitzkrieg on the judicial system. But it just replaces with another way. So if you look from bird's eye view, you look and you just change the tactics. Basically, the determination to destroy the independence of the Supreme Court did not change. And the need to get full control of all three branches. You know, in Israel, people do not know it as well, that there are no different executive branch and legislative. Legislative branch is already totally enslaved to the executive branch for years now. You cannot pass the slightest law in the Knesset if it's not agreed upon by the government. Here and there, the government doesn't want to put it to the front that it gave an allowance, but basically you cannot pass any law, and there is no active control of the government, like you have this balance within a committee, the Knesset and the Senate on the budget and what the president can do. There is nothing like that. Executive and legislature are already under the control of the prime minister, and he wants only to join the judicial. And that's basically what makes it de facto dictatorship. So it won't change his objective. It won't change his behavior. It might change the tactics. If he will feel that there is a need to lie, no one believes him in Israel. No one believes him, including his closest aides, and no one believes. Everyone want a down payment on everything. There's no naivete anymore about it. So he might come to Israel, say, I decided to block all these reform for the next year. I only need you to give me 2 more judges or to change the identity of the next Supreme Court chief. And he will, the moment he got what he needs for the time being, sometimes just time. Give him the time to get the protest tired, or to seduce once again the president, to convince the opposition to go in some fake, hollow negotiation about something. And he might try to cheat on the whole people. At the moment he will feel it appropriate, he will forget it and use it. I tend to say that Netanyahu basically already now holds how it's called, loaded and cocked gun to the temple of the democracy in the form of two laws that had already been passed and will be put in the coming few weeks. They will come to the Supreme Court for judgment. One of them deals with the incapacitation of an acting president, something like the 25th Amendment in America. Another one deals with this, the unreasonableness clause, which is something that we do for the British judicial system and developed along the times. And there are another 9 laws that already passed the preliminary and first reading, only has to complete the two last readings, second and third. But this could be completed within hours, within 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. and any working day of the Knesset. So it's basically a cocked gun. And I'm telling the people, I don't recommend you neither in public life, in political life, in business life, or in diplomacy, to adopt the practice of negotiating under handgun to your temple. That's like discussing the discussion between the wolf and the lamb about what to eat for dinner, or discussion between the rapist and the victim about what are the wide understanding about the term of the next rape. You don't do it if you are a life-pursuing society.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to switch you over to another subject now, all connected, but can we talk about the tension between Bibi and the heads of the military services over the coup's adverse impact on the military's readiness? Apparently, Bibi didn't let the IDF Chief of Staff brief the cabinet before the Knesset voted on abolishing the reasonableness doctrine, which you referred to just now, which will actually let government officials legislate for their personal gain and overturn laws relating to almost anything. Can you help our American participants understand why is it so significant that he didn't allow them to access the cabinet?
Because unlike the American system, where the person at the top was directly elected by the people, directly, and he is the commander-in-chief, that's not the case in Israel. In Israel, the prime minister is not commander-in-chief. And the body which has to make any decision is the government as a collective. And for sensitive issue, half of the government is defined as inner cabinet and should be dealing with everything. I am the longest alive serving defense minister in the past. It never happened in the history of Israel. Before I became Minister of Defense, spent 35 years in uniform. And I know it from almost day one of the there was no case in the history of Israel where the Minister of Defense, who is directly sitting over, responsible directly to the defense forces, basically the chief of staff, the role that I served in at the end of my career, is subordinated to the Minister of Defense. It never happened that the Minister of Defense of Israel says there is a present and clear danger to the security in the short time, and I demand to gather the cabinet. If he calls the Prime Minister at 4 o'clock in the morning, by 10 o'clock at most, there should be a cabinet meeting. And they felt exactly this. The Minister of Defense, Gallant, is a former general himself, and he's a minister nominated by Netanyahu. He found it impossible to convince Netanyahu. Netanyahu flew to London after he demanded for him gather the cabinet. We are facing something unprecedented within the army. People who are volunteers, I will have to explain this as well, because it's also not understood. Are they rebellions or whatever? They're not rebellions, it's nothing. It's a part of almost of their civic, not just right, in my judgment, obligation. But he sees it, and it's for reason that has to do with the structure of Israel forces. It's a major damage to our capacity to execute operation, even if not within few days. And Netanyahu flew to London and didn't left him alone, so he found it himself committed to tell it to the public. Now, it's unprecedented, and there is a reason for it. The same way that I described earlier the reason for the existence of this unholy alliance at the government, the reason is that 3 days later, They were supposed to be the first, the final reading of this law of unreasonableness. And Netanyahu is not idiot. He understands that if the cabinet, which includes some 16 members, at least 12 of them are members of the Knesset, which vote. And if the committee, the closed committee, kind of confidential committee, subcommittee of the Committee on Foreign Relations as well, which members of the opposition will hear a briefing from the Minister of Defense, from the Chief of Staff, from the Head of Intelligence, from the Commander of the Air Force, they will not vote for this law because they will understand the risk. So he decided to block their opportunity, which is part of that's his responsibility to make sure that before people make a decision on heavy issues, they will understand all the implications. That's part of the responsibility. That's part of his also swearing to loyalty to the rules of the game and to the state of Israel. And he betrayed it bluntly for his need to achieve this undemocratic or this wild law that will enable him, as Esther Hayut warned, to destroy the independence of the Supreme Court and push us out of the family of democracy. So basically, it's I don't know how to translate hefkerut into English. Probably one of you will help.
I'm missing the word.
Totally unacceptable behavior that should end up by the public, because there is no authority over it. It's only the public, and his cabinet behaves like a group of cohorts or opportunists. So that's the story. So I think that later on it repeated himself. Even a few weeks or a few months later, it comes again a few weeks ago, before the last vote of this law, the last law, the previous case was with the first law. Now it came for the second law. Once again, the Chief of General Staff and Gallant demanding in writing. They did not appeal to the public in order not to give a reward to our enemies, but they put it on record and in a very clear demand in writing, gather the cabinet and order the Knesset to gather the closed committees of the Knesset to discuss the depths of the crisis within the defense forces before you go to vote. And once again, he rejected it. And the Chief of Staff sent into the Knesset during the day of the voting, the head of intelligence and the head of operation, the J2 and J3, in equivalent to American term, to brief the ministers and the cabinet members. And they didn't want to, Netanyahu didn't gather them, and they were not interested except for two ministers. No one came to hear them. So think of it. The whole defense system believes that something immediately and clearly dangerous to our the security of a country. They are confident, and the prime minister acting aggressively to avoid them from briefing his ministers and the people who are going to vote. That's one can find the translation. I don't have the word.
Disregard, but wanton disregard. But I want to stop you for a minute because you referred to something and I want to ask you about it. And I have so many questions, and I know that Victoria is probably getting lots of questions. I see there are lots of questions.
I will try to be shorter in my...
No, it's okay. No, I was going to say that, you said that you would come again once we defeat this there,
Yeah.
but we're going to bring you even before if we need to, right? Because you're having a
Okay.
good time. I wanted to ask you about the reservists, the voluntary reservists. Just for our audience to know, there are reservists who have stated that they will no longer be volunteering. They volunteer, right? So they are now saying we will no longer volunteer. It's within their rights. But I want to ask you, shouldn't the army, you're talking about military readiness, should the army not be above all this? And what is going through the minds of Israel's enemies?
First of all, I want to explain what's the nature, why it's a problem at all. Unlike the American standing army, in Israel, people, especially those in special roles, like the pilots or air crews, on one hand, cyber warriors, special forces officers, they all accumulate a lot of experience, which is very important to the execution of operations. And I don't want to quote the numbers, but a very significant fraction of pilots at the cockpits of any Israel attack on Syrian R&D installation or some Iranian convoy that goes from Iran through Iraq to Syria to Lebanon. On all these attacks, a significant fraction of the pilots and significant fraction of the people at the command post of the Air Force are reservists who are not committed, you know, they are not committed. They have to have a special contract that they agree to volunteer whenever they are called. They're sometimes called from, you know, treating their youngsters to go to school. They're called, you have to be there within Israel, a very compact country, within an hour and a half, you can be the right squadron and fly this night, risking your life, and executing a mission for the army. So these people has the right, it's a written legal right to suspend their volunteering whenever they want. They just have to give 72 hours note. And our operational capabilities are very deeply built upon them. So basically they are using it. Secondly, they are using it as individuals. It's not organized, you know, and you might find Israeli media many kind of claims basically initiated by the inner circle around Netanyahu that I am personally responsible for organizing all this, and I'm coordinate with everything. The minds of some Michiganders around him is part of a great conspiracy, that including the Freemasons and Illuminati and Soros and everyone on earth. Everything is against Bibi. That's all nonsense. It's not secret that I talk to people and do whatever I think a citizen should do in such a situation, but nothing like they even say that Barak is financed using secret funds and some money from the Iranians out of the conspiracy theories. It's crazy, but basically these people are saying, we have a contract with democratic Israel. We are ready to risk our life whenever we are called to any mission in short notice beyond any law. It's just a result of our contract with the defense forces. And we are ready to bury our comrades or to be buried by them if that was the price of our service. But we do not have, and we cannot have, a contract with dictatorship. We do not trust the judgment. We do not trust, you know, in modern Air Force, you fly somewhere over the Mediterranean, over some other piece of ground in the Middle East, and you launch a high precision munition that will hit exactly the place that you aimed it, but you don't see it and you don't know what happens there. You have to trust the judgment, the legitimacy, and the overall justification. And they say, we do not trust a dictatorship. What characterizes the behavior of these emerging dictatorship is they are not committed to anything which is important to Israel, not to the security, not to the relation with the United States, not to the economy, not to the cohesion of the whole society. And they are doing all of this in the almost private, personal, illegitimate, blatantly illegitimate rules. We say in Hebrew, a black flag waving over their orders. So we don't want to be part of it. And we suspend it until it will be over. And to ever say what I say, I back them with no hesitation. If I were in the right age and still serving in one of them, I would do the same. And so I think that they are the opposite. The rebellion is Netanyahu. He rebels in his own oath. He rebels the tradition and legitimacy of the authority of the prime minister. He betrays his voters, not all of them. Some of them behave like a cult, that whatever he does. There is a lady who said that if he will rape my daughter, I still vote for it. So it should be, you have many type of craziness among human beings. But basically, it's not his, he seems to be out of race. And they just do not trust that a man who can destroy Israel in such a way and try to turn it into dictatorship deserves their loyalty. And I always tell the public and the coalition, I tell them, there is very easy way to put an end to all these crises. Let Netanyahu order a special gathering of the Knesset next week during the pause, you know, in the summer, the Knesset doesn't work. Call them to a special gathering next week, and between Tuesday morning and Tuesday evening, cancel all these 11 laws, the 2 that already passed into laws, and the 9 which became almost kind of very close. Just remove the handgun from the temple of the democracy, and immediately all the pilots will say, Amichai, we suspend our suspension. So it's in your head. Bibi is rebelling against the law, against the legitimate, against the everything that is precious for us. And those guys are heroes who put their thumbs into the hollow in the dam in order to stop it. They will ultimately be the heroes of this struggle. The pilots, the cyber warriors, the special forces, and the many other officers there are some 15,000, quite big number in the Israeli army, and touching the most sensitive missions. I'm very proud of them.
So we have about 10 minutes left, a little bit more if you agree to go over, but I had a million questions and I'm dropping them all right now because I know we can see how many questions are in the audience.
Choose the best 10 of them, of the million.
No. So I just have one last short question and then we'll go to Victoria. Okay. Since we're talking to an American audience and to a lot of US Jews, what is their right and what is their obligation? And how do you see the way that American Jews can support the democracy defenders, as Tom Friedman called them?
I think that you have, there is no formal kind of commitment. I think that you have a moral commitment to stand behind the protest. I think that it's not something that you can say, oh, that's not our case. It's, you know, we are partners in a way. Israel pretends to be the government for the people of Israel and for the whole Jewish people. So the Jewish people has a voice. And I think that you are contributing so much along so many years for the strength of Israel, supporting us in any crucial turn of the way that you have the right to raise your voice, especially when this government become more anti-diaspora than any previous government, in the way that they give such a central role to the successor of Rabbi Kahana, which was American Michigan and Israel Michigan, when he was going to the podium at the Knesset, Shamir, the extreme right-wing prime minister, and many of people of Likud party was leaving the hall, the assembly hall. They didn't want to even to see him. So now his successors, they are, it's unacceptable, and you have to fight for it. In fact, I'm critic of AIPAC in a way. AIPAC made it a rule to almost broadcast a unison of support for the government. Let's say, give and take any government, but with some emphasis on right-wing government. And I telling them, not in these last 9 months, I tell them in the last 5 years, you know, I'm yearning to hear mature voices from American leadership of the Jewish people in America. I would love to hear them basically I expect every American Jew, every Jew in the world, and some Gentiles as well, to be behind Israel in every critical turning point. But under normal situation, when you have issues that are in dispute in Israel, I would expect the American jury to basically represent the same spectrum of voices. It's more mature, we are partners, we should not be immune against hearing criticism. There is no reason why the reflection of different views, which is the essence of political and public life in Israel, would not be reflected in America. And I think that it would be much more healthy if you raise your voice with self-confidence. Don't be apologetic. I always tell the reform leadership, you contributed so much to Israel in so many ways. You should be your voice should be heard much louder and much more self-confident in never apologize for the demand to be a legitimate part on equal terms with any other stream in Judaism. There is no way to define Judaism as something that belongs to the ultra-Orthodox. There was never Judaism is about pluralism, and the Talmud, there are great stories about you are white and you're white, and God agree with both of you, but follow the practices of Beit Hillel, because they listen to the other side before they make decisions. Not Bet Shammai, who was so confident, like AIPAC, that always they knew what should be said.
Well, thank you so much. Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm Victoria, and I'm going to be going through some of the questions from our audience. Actually, a lot of the questions were about how American Jews can be more supportive of the protest movement, especially when our official leadership like AIPAC and things like that have actually chosen to be married basically to the current government. So other than the protests that we've been trying to do, that we as an organization have been active in, whether it's in the cities all throughout America and different synagogues and JCCs, what can we do to make our voices actually have an impact on amplifying the protest movement and on the current coalition's decision making?
I think you have impact already. I think that the certain events in New York, basically, but also in other cities, in Philadelphia, to convince Danchek to slow down in support of the most extreme groups. And your voice is well heard, and you should just make it more massive and more widely spread, and never apologize for doing the right thing. We are on the right side of history, on the right side of the truth, on the right side of what's good for Israel, and we do not apologize. We do not look for any, I don't look for Netanyahu to agree. I look him to capitulate to the will of the power at the end of this struggle, and I don't know how exactly it will end. And but we have to be active and to talk to American people to explain those things that we briefly discussed here, and you can find much more material in many Israeli groups. Secondly, you can help financially. It's quite costly to run this operation because it goes deeper and deeper and strengthen and has to keep it running tenaciously into the end of summer and into this coming winter, and you can help. I'm proud to say that after many years that there was no real philanthropy in Israel. Nowadays in Israel, especially in the high-tech kind of sector, there is enough money, and we see more and more Israel donating. We gathered many tens of millions of shekels from Israelis before we asked Americans to participate as well, but there is more than one channel, always 501c3, everything is well arranged, and even those who do not want to be identified could do it anonymously. And but I think that that's important, of course, to talk over the heads or not behind the back. There was nothing to hide, but over the heads of AIPAC to talk with members of these 535 decision maker or legislative branch of America. And people ask me what Biden should do. I basically tell them, don't expect Biden to lie on the barbed wire for us. He's an extremely good friend of Israel. I know him for many years. I'm half a year older than him, and I was half a year older when we first met 40 years ago. And he's very good friend of Israel, and I trust his judgment. I don't think that for sure not Israeli should try to influence him or to convince him what to do. But I think that, as Tom Friedman said publicly many times, there is a kind of, there is not enough voices telling our story to the American public and to American decision makers, and you can make take an important role in it.
So another question from the audience that comes up multiple times is, what happens come the fall if the Supreme Court does say in the Marbury versus Madison moment that Israel is about to have, that these are, they must overturn these laws? And you hinted earlier that hopefully this will never be violent, but that these are the highest level people in the Mossad and the Shin Bet and the army and everything. Is there, what are the scenarios you predict that could happen should the government not follow the Supreme Court?
In the next 4 or 6 weeks, there will be several discussions of these issues in the Supreme Court. I expect the Supreme Court to find the right way to block this legislation. Probably they will find a kind of a less aggressive way, not canceling it formally, but demanding to delay, to find other formulation. I don't know. And I cannot predict it. But it's the first time in history that the full membership, all the 15 members of Supreme Court will sit on it. And I feel strongly that they cannot but block this legislation, even if softly. Then a major constitutional crisis start to emerge. It won't be immediate. It will be immediate if the government will announce that it rejected. But probably they will not announce. They just ignore it and keep moving incrementally in many other channels toward de facto dictatorship. But sooner or later, a situation will be created where one of what we call the gatekeepers, the head of the army, the armed force, the head of the Secret Service, Mossad, or the head of the police, will get an order which will contradict a clear, concrete resolution of the Supreme Court. By then, they will go to their legal advisor that will take them to the general attorney, a lady very, very strong, stainless steel spine, a lady named Gali Bahar-Miara, and she will guide them to follow the law and the Supreme Court, not the government. And I expect them to do this. I'm quite confident that when it comes to a concrete contradiction, they will not do anything but follow the resolution of the Supreme Court. But having said that, Bibi knows it as well. So he will try to bypass it, not to reach it immediately, to try to solve this issue of the nomination of the Supreme Court judges. I think that the Supreme Court will block this as well. And it will, at a certain point, it will start to fall down. I don't know what will be the exact trajectory. It might come from the other members of the unholy alliance that he cannot satisfy. If he cannot bring these twice convicted minister into his original ministry, probably the guy will say, okay, the hell with it, I don't have a reason to stay. If he cannot pass the non-draft law for the ultra-Orthodox that will relieve them permanently, fully from any commitment to serve the country, probably they will reject. If some development with the relation with the United States will block Netanyahu from giving the Messianic racists all what they want, they might crash. And if it keeps go down in the favorability numbers as a result of his going straight, going out of the rails, keep behaving in improper way, we see in the demonstration more and more young people, more and more right-wingers, moderate right-wingers, more and more religious people with the yarmulkes coming and say we are religious, but we are Zionist and we are pro-democracy. So his popularity will go down, and he fails in anything. He fails in fighting the terror. He fails in fighting organized crime. At a certain point, cracks might appear within Likud. And never forget his court case, which is continuing. And probably in 9 months or somewhat less, he will have to appear. And he doesn't want to appear on the podium to testify because he understands it will be huge embarrassment for probably he cannot recuperate. He needs certain exit from his court case before those 9 months. So it's not clear how it will develop. But I'm confident that it will happen this or other way. We have to still invest there to keep everything still kind of focused. The protest should be focused and continued and growing all the time. But I'm confident we will meet somewhere probably next year, probably later. Israel will not turn into de facto dictatorship.
Okay, I think on that optimistic note, we've run a little bit over, and even though there are about 50 more questions to ask, we'll have to save it, I think, for another time. But we all want to thank you very much for sharing your very clear thoughts on this, and we will continue to fight along with you and everyone else.
That's good. Never give up. And never sway. Whatever pressure it was, the objective of our fighting justify even certain sacrifice in order to make sure that we will win, and we will. Thank you all. Thank you very much, and thank all the viewers at home.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.
Laila tov.